Today's show is sponsored by DivvyCloud. DivvyCloud protects cloud and container environments from policy violations, threats, IAM challenges, and misconfigurations. Types of misconfigurations that have cost enterprises a jaw-dropping $5 trillion over the last 2 years. DivvyCloud provides continuous security and compliance across all cloud service providers and containers, including AWS, GCP, Azure, Alibaba, and Kubernetes, providing a comprehensive view of what's in your cloud, along with the tools and automation you need to manage it today. DivvyCloud is proving that security and innovation are not mutually exclusive, one customer at a time. Join innovative enterprises like Spotify, Fannie Mae, and Discovery, who have found the freedom to innovate securely without loss of control. To learn more, visit divvycloud.com/cloudcast. That's DIVVYCLOUD.com/cloudcast to sign up for a free trial. DivvyCloud. Find your freedom to innovate.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Good to be back with everybody. We are rolling into August of 2020. The year is more than half done, so moving into the second half of the year and some good cloud news of the week. We're going to jump right into that. Kind of quick recap, because we always talk about the earnings, and the earnings numbers kind of got split up between the different cloud providers. So we talked about it a little bit last week. Azure was up 47%, $50 billion run rate annually. IBM had been up 13% on their cloud business, about a $22 billion run rate, at least as announced. And then this week, AWS and Google announced their numbers. So AWS numbers were up 29% for Q2, about a $10.8 billion run rate. So let's call that $44 billion annual number. And then Google Cloud was up 43% year over year. So about a $3 billion quarter. So let's put that at around $12 billion. And again, outside of AWS, they're really the only one that is very clearly breaks out their numbers. All of the other ones sort of mix in their numbers with some other stuff, although GCP is fairly well broken out, although they do include some of the Google Cloud Suite stuff as well. So, comparing apples to apples, not the easiest thing to do, but we're getting a little bit better at that. So, we're still seeing growth from all the major cloud players. Some areas are slowing down a little bit. AWS slowing down a little bit, but don't want to speak badly about AWS. Don't want to not be allowed to be on their podcast down the road. A couple of other things in cloud news of the week that were interesting. RedMonk, our friends over at RedMonk, James Governor and Stephen O'Grady and all the other good folks at RedMonk, announced their language rankings for 2020. Those are out. And they go through a lot of things for those of you that are sort of language geeks that are, concerned about which languages are growing, which ones are growing the fastest. Let's kind of walk through their ranking. Number 1, JavaScript. Number 2, Python. First time that any non-Java centric language, at least in the time that the RedMonk folks had been tracking this, had made the top 2. So Python number 2. Java number 3, PHP number 4, C++ number 5, C#, also tied at number 5, Ruby number 7, tied with CSS at number 7, TypeScript number 9, and C coming in at top 10. Rust did make the top 20, so for those of you that are Rust fans, Go at 15, R at 13, PowerShell at 17. So you can go through and see the numbers. They do a really, really good job of sort of, sussing out not only the numbers, how things track, how they've been tracking year over year, but also some really good kind of analysis of maybe why some of the languages are moving up or moving down. And then also, they do a real good job of kind of breaking down some of the hype around certain languages and what are still, really resonating with the largest number of developers. So they pull all their data from both GitHub and Stack Overflow. So they a couple of very broad data points. So again, interesting stuff going on. Obviously, the earnings numbers are always interesting, especially here in the COVID times, looking at, how companies are shifting to the cloud, if that's accelerating or not. Actually would have thought some of the numbers would have been a little bit higher. But, we're not exactly sure if maybe some of the I don't want to say slower growth numbers, but sometimes when things slow from quarter to quarter, you're not sure if that's because there's less usage or if that's because maybe increased discounts or maybe not as much customers paying for as much as what they were before. So will be interesting to watch that. And with that, we're going to kind of wrap up Cloud News of the Week. Just kind of wanted to hit on a couple of those things in terms of revenue numbers and some rankings and all that are out there. We have a very interesting guest, actually a couple of guests, our new good friends from Microsoft are going to be joining us. We're going to talk about all things identity, especially in a very distributed world. So we're going to get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and traces from technologies like Istio, AppMesh, and Envoy. Plus, Datadog's Service Map automatically plots out the dependencies in your microservices architectures for seamless, context-rich troubleshooting. With rich visualizations, algorithmic alerting, and more than 250 vendor-supported integrations, Datadog allows you to monitor your distributed applications in real time. Start a free 14-day trial today by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. And Datadog will send you a great free t-shirt. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, as you know, we are now living in a much more distributed world than we used to be 3 months ago, 4 months ago, however many number of months ago it's been since we started dealing with this pandemic and dealing with, working remote. But being able to log into our systems, have an identity on our systems, be able to be recognized has been a big deal for a long time. It basically is the starting point for almost every piece of computing, but we've never really covered it on the show. And we thought today might be a good day to get started on that. And we thought, well, if we're going to get started on it, we may as well get started with the folks that everybody sort of thinks of when they think of identity. So excited to have a couple of folks from Microsoft joining us, Christos Matskas and John Dandison. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So you guys have both been with Microsoft for a little while. You both work in kind of both the security and identity space. Just for folks being able to hear your voice and associate a name with a voice and also kind of get a little bit of your background. Christos, why don't you give us a little bit of your background first, kind of what you've been working on at Microsoft, and then John, do the same thing.
Sounds good. So I joined Microsoft back in 2016. I'm a developer and geek at heart, so I've been coding code for quite a few years. And the past few years, I've been helping customers with either Azure, cloud, programming, and what have you. And these days, I work as a developer advocate for the identity division, and we help customers build solutions around our identity.
Excellent. John, what about you?
So I've been at Microsoft about 4 years, and before I came over here, I did consulting and worked in enterprise line of business development. So built a lot of apps with things like .NET and Java, and came to Microsoft to focus on working with customers and doing working cloud and in Azure specifically. And I suppose that identity work rolls downhill. And I couldn't get out of the way fast enough.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing a lot of it over the years, and I kind of gravitated towards it. I just had a lot of interest in identity that I didn't have to own as a developer. And a few months ago, I met Christos, and he and I started working together on making it easier for developers to get started using our platform. So
yeah, very, very cool. And you are a son of North Carolina, so essentially you're an extension of the massive Cloudcast studios. We're glad to have you. Not that, Christos, we're not glad to have you as well. And just for those listening, John's young son, it is pouring down rain here in North Carolina. John's young son has decided to ride his bike around the house, which is great. We encourage that, but you may hear some rumbling at some point. So not a problem at all. Guys, let's start with some basic stuff. So for anybody who doesn't live in the security world, or you're a developer that just wants to write code and all of a sudden you got to think about identity, like give me the basic things that people need to think about in terms of identity, or the basic technical concepts that are kind of core to this space.
Sure. It really comes down to who you are. And who you are is somewhat of an ambiguous term, because who you are could be lots of different things to lots of different groups. So you might be one identity to your company, and you might be a totally separate identity to your family, and a totally separate identity to Google for your Google account or something like that. So identity is sort of everything that goes into knowing who a user is, or knowing what a user has access to, and everything that goes into that, because I need to know who you are in a sort of a verifiable way, but how do we verify who you are? And that's sort of the core of what we do, is help developers figure out how to identify users so that they can make sure they have access to the right things and make sure they see the data that is pertinent to them. And it's one of those things that's been around forever, but it got considerably more difficult and more interesting when we started moving to these sort of low trust, medium trust zones like public clouds. And so the space has really taken off since then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Things obviously they get more, as you mentioned, we start getting in distributed places. Things get more complicated because we no longer have, the four walls of our office. We no longer have kind of, protected areas and unprotected areas. Give us some sense whether we're talking about, multiple devices. Do you have an identity that goes with multiple devices? Is it a third-party application, i.e., it's an API, it's a non-entity to your business, like it's a contractor. Like, give us a scope of like how has all those things that are outside of the normal purview of what a business would think, how does that now complicate identity, and what are some of the ways you have to think about that?
It's all of the above, right? We've all been sent home because of coronavirus and everything going on, and the world is a totally different place now than it was even 10 years ago in terms of the kinds of devices we use and how people work. I've got a dozen devices sitting here on my desk that all buzz and go crazy whenever I get a Teams call, and I can never seem to answer the right one. But between your cell phone and your tablets and your laptops, we all have an identity at work, for example. And we don't want to have 3 different passwords to sign into 3 different devices. Because if we have 3 passwords, which of course we all have exponentially more of those, we end up reusing the same ones over and over, or we write it down on a Post-it note and stick it to our monitor and things like that. And so we want to have a consistent identity for work, for example. So we sign in with the same username, the same password, or the same credential, because passwords aren't even really the big thing anymore. So that if I'm at work and I need to get to my email and I need to get to files that I'm sharing with other folks, and I'm sitting at a laptop at my desk at my home office, and Christos is across the country and I need to send him an Excel sheet or some data that we're working on together, I need to know that it gets to him and only him. I can't afford to have that data leak somewhere, and he needs to be able to get to it in a consistent way. And on whatever device he might be on, he's 3 hours behind me. So most of the time, my workday ends before his does, and I'm on my phone in the evenings after my kids go to bed, or I'm, pop open my laptop upstairs. So, I switch devices constantly. It's a constant battle between which device am I going to use for different things, and knowing who I am on each one of those devices it's just a super critical part of my experience as an employee.
Christos, as you talk about sort of, talking with developers, developer relations with them, like what do they think about? What types of conversations are you having with them? Because they're trying to write an application that's going to be a great experience. It's going to do data processing or analytics or whatever it's going to do. At what point in that conversation or in their thought process do they start thinking about identity? And then oftentimes what's the scope of that? Is it I have to think about 1 million users, or is it I have to think about, how I interact with APIs? What's the kind of give me the scope of what developers are having to deal with these days?
I have to say that it's funny, but we don't really have identity developers, right? So even though we're developer advocates for identity, we don't really identify as, there's no identity developer. So there's not somebody that just writes identity and moves on to do the next identity for next system and then the next identity. So developers tend to deal with identity as a side effect. Right, so I work on a solution. I need to integrate with some data, or I need to authenticate my users before they buy something from my company. So I need to integrate that quickly into my solution and then move on. And unfortunately, throughout the years, as we work with customers, we do find that there are challenges on how people implement that, and whether they know what's out there or whether they're aware of the implementations. So developers come to us with very different problems and solutions. From implementing and rolling out their own kind of authentication and identity system, which we advise against, because you don't want to end up in the news, like recent news or older news of companies being owned by not having secure infrastructure and solutions, and then all the way to how do I scale my identity system now that I have it rolled out somewhere. So for us, it's guiding developers and companies actually to adopt the right infrastructure, the right solution, whether it's an organizational line of business app or whether it's an external kind of solution where a company like Target needs to implement and integrate external customers where they come, they sign in with their social media accounts, and then they can go and shop their things. So from a developer perspective and from a company's perspective, we've seen a massive transformation, especially in the last couple of months with COVID pushing things the way that they went, the remote work and the remote access. We went from, companies looking at we're going to migrate the cloud, or we're going to accelerate our cloud and digital transformation from 3 years to 3 months. Like Satya said that at some point, like we've seen this massive transformation. Even from my personal experience, like we now do all our food ordering online. We used to go to the supermarket to buy stuff. Now, like we had to create so many different accounts, like Instacart and what have you, to be able to do these things. So you can see how identity underpins everything, is the foundation of many companies. Yeah. Developers don't really think of that as from the onset. So what we want to instill there is that, yes, identity can be tricky. Identity can be hard sometimes to work with. But if you, we give you the right tools, we give you the right examples, and we allow you with a delegated kind of authentication via our identity platform for you to quickly integrate into your solution securely and then move on to the next task.
Yeah. Do you get a sense that developers have, have an idea of what types of authentication they're going to have to deal with? So, for example, if I think of my day-to-day, there's things I do for work where it's, basic username and password. Other times it's some sort of SSO that, seems to kind of keep my credentials as I go from internal site to internal site or something like that. And then other times, like you said, it's, like I log in with my Gmail account or I log in with a Facebook account. Like, do they have a sense of what that whole experience is going to look like? Or, is their part of the application only have to deal with some part of identity and they won't be involved if it didn't get authenticated further up the chain?
I have to say that there's not really a cookie cutter approach to these ones, right? Every solution is fairly customized. Gotcha. And if you're writing a line of business app that is going to run in the internet, then you really don't want your users to have to authenticate all the time. So from that perspective, it makes sense to use a solution that integrates with SSO, right? Single sign-on. But if you have customers that come to you from all over the place and they're not part of your org, then you don't want to use an organizational solution and identity that expects them to be part of the org. So at that point, you're thinking like business to consumer or external identities to your solution. What we try to provide developers is an easy guide to make that decision and make the right decision, right? So give them kind of a scenario-driven approach and say, what are you trying to build? What are you trying to solve? And then we'll guide them down the right path rather than trying to say, this is a full list of all the things that you can do today and inundate them with too much information.
Right. So, and again, this is sort of for either one of you. What are the types of things? So when I think about, what people are involved with, sometimes it's Active Directory, sometimes it's LDAP, but then there's plenty of other things that we have to say authenticate to. So it could be a VPN, it could be Okta as some sort of SaaS front end. Like from your perspective, from Microsoft, in terms of the tools that you can help people with, like kind of walk me through what are some of the offerings or the things that you might present in front of your customers, your developers, to go, hey, these are the things that can help you. Like these are available. These can help you. Like what's that scope or breadth of things today?
So there's a lot. Azure AD is our sort of core offering, and Azure AD itself encompasses dozens and dozens of different individual features and products as a part of it. For us, as we talk to developers, our story to developers is, hey, if you're in a large org, for example, and your org already has Office 365 or is using Azure or some other Microsoft platform, you already have Azure AD. This isn't something that you have to configure and build yourself, because we see a lot of developers who are building sort of net new identity solutions, sometimes for every app or for every scenario they get into, where they're building a username and password database, or they're building with a very specific point product just for one app or just for one collection of apps. And so what we want to offer is sort of this organizational model that's available for the cloud. So if we think about like Office 365 and Azure today, we take your sort of on-premises user data in whatever form you have it, LDAP or Active Directory or any kind of different directory solution, sometimes even straight out of databases. And we start pumping those users and those user objects up into the cloud, up into Azure AD.
Okay.
And once those users are in Azure AD, now they're available for nearly anything. So they're available for your apps that you're building, for line of business apps, for internal folks, or for partner apps. Your partners come in and your partners can use those apps, or for vendor apps that you've bought. So if you say use a Dropbox or something like that, Azure AD can also handle securing your user authentication through to Dropbox. So instead of me having to have my corporate login that I use for one thing and a Dropbox separate username and password, I'm using the same account, the same sort of corporate account or Azure AD account for everything. And my administrators, my organizational administrators, are the ones defining those relationships. And setting policy to say, hey, I don't want data to leak from service ABC. So let's put some strong security on a user trying to sign into Dropbox, for example. Let's make sure they use MFA or can only access it from the office or something like that. And those controls are set Azure AD side so that when one of their users goes to sign into Dropbox, they can't just sign in directly. They have to use their corporate account. They may have to MFA. They may have to have some other collection of criteria in order to connect to that service. And as a developer, you have that same functionality available to you, which is really cool, because instead of you as the dev having to build in things like MFA or figuring out how to configure policy of what people can and can't do inside of your app, a lot of that can be controlled on the Azure AD side, and your app is merely integrating with it. So the amount of code you have to write drops pretty considerably.
Yeah. And for that sort of scenario, like, do they still call that like identity federation, or is that concept of federation still there? Or is this just, we connect with those systems. There's a way of naturally doing that through Azure AD.
It could be called federation. It uses standard identity federation protocols, things like OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 and SAML, which SAML's a little bit older and would be familiar. It's widely available and used by a lot of different services. So if you're not familiar with identity, SAML's probably the first one you would be interacting with. But I guess you'd still call it federation. We're starting to see much more of almost a blend, if you want to call it that, of sort of classic traditional federation, but more of this, maybe more of an integration now rather than a pure proper federation between identity systems themselves.
Gotcha. And so I'm the admin responsible for this, right? I'm the security officer that owns identity. Application teams come to me. Like, what's their world look like? I mean, how frequently are they getting requests for new applications? I mean, at some point, is it just like, hey, here's the AD service, just connect to it just like you would DHCP, so it's not a big deal. But like, there's making sure that, if an employee leaves, they're locked out like in 2 minutes or 1 minute, or like, give me a day in the life of that person these days having to deal with this sort of, no longer have firewalls, no longer have boundaries. What are the challenges they're dealing with?
I think the big one is the lack of that moat, right? The lack of that perimeter of the giant castle of the network to say, it's okay what happens inside of our network. As long as we secure the perimeter, it's going to be super strong and we're going to own it. And it's going to be, it's going to be impenetrable, because of course that's not true anyway, right? We all have services. We have to get out to the internet. And so we are coaching and helping administrators start and ops folks who own those kinds of systems for identity systems to think more about, how do I make sure that my identity is rock solid? How do I make sure that I can authenticate this user and know who they are beyond the shadow of a doubt? So we get into things like strong credentials like FIDO keys, which are USB sticks, or NFC tags that you stick into a computer, and it stores some strong authentication data about you on the device, as opposed to you just using a password to go and sign in. Admins set MFA policies to say, if you're going to use this application, then you need to make sure that you use a multi-factor app on your phone or on or even a certificate on a FIDO key as a separate device. And beyond just configuring those policies, we also need to make sure that people are using them correctly and that you're auditing what they're doing. And that's key too. This is sort of another big side or a big component of Azure AD is making sure that you see, sometimes in great detail, what's happening with your users, right? Because you can't necessarily monitor their phone or their laptops all the time. So where are your users signing in from? What kind of devices are they using to sign in from? What kind of services are they trying to sign in to? All of those pieces of data can help you make better decisions as an administrator as to whether or not this user might be compromised or is doing something outside of their sort of normal pattern. And that whole sort of logging suite is a big component of Azure AD too. And we have a whole fleet of products around monitoring that for you and giving you alerts and telling you when somebody signed in from Europe and the US within 5 minutes of each other, which, unless they call it the Superman problem, right?
Right.
Unless you're Superman, you didn't make it from the US to Europe in 5 minutes. So these are all things that administrators have to think about. And they're things that administrators have had to think about for a long time. But it's easier to contain when it's on your network, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to contain when it's you and 2,000 of your closest friends at your company who all go to the same office every day and use VPN for everything and use trusted lockdown devices every day. And the new world of accessing my email in a browser, for example, is foreign to a lot of companies.
Yeah. And given that a lot of this stuff is now running in the cloud, it's a cloud service. Is there beginning to become much more than just logs and intelligent logging? There's some sort of AI and machine learning sitting behind here to deal with the Superman problem or deal with, hey, that anomaly looks kind of weird, like I can automatically take care of it. Are we seeing more automation or more intelligence behind the scenes of these things?
Absolutely.
You have to, right? Well, you have to, because the scale of the services grow so fast that it becomes impossible for a set of admins to be able to deal with all these things and scan the logs all the time. So even for us as Microsoft, we have these services for us first and foremost. We operate at a zero trust network, which means that when I log into my corporate machine, the assumption is that this machine is compromised from the onset. So the network deals with these things, and we have tools to look into the behavior of a specific machine and then make sure that things are isolated very, very quickly. To be able to achieve that, you need to rely on machine learning and artificial intelligence to scan these. And because we have to make sure that our network first and foremost is secure, then the same tools that we use for us are used for our customers as well. So in extension, the data that we collect on Azure AD from irregular usage or bots or whatever, they become available to everyone that use the suite in order for us to be able to fend out any threats or any security issues. And you automatically get that out of the box. You don't have, as an admin, to opt in for that, right? So automatically you can focus on managing your enterprise more efficiently rather than having to scan the logs every morning to see if there was any irregular behavior from your users somewhere.
Right. Yeah. And I have to imagine, and this may not be completely in your purview, but I imagine there's got to be a good amount of learning coming from the GitHub team being shared with the Microsoft team, just because you're now dealing with a world in which you have, thousands and thousands of people that, will use whatever identity they want. The system lets them in. They're constantly doing things, but it's not a sort of just a free forum like it just used to be, some message board. It's, it's tied to stuff that is going to push code, could impact your environment in production. It's got, it's a whole nother level of sort of all the problems combined into one place. I imagine there's probably a lot of cross-pollination learning coming from that group to you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. And there's so many, we have such a sort of a massive data set as the scale of the service is just so large that I think we announced, because yesterday was, or sometime in the past few weeks was earnings calls, and they were talking about, big numbers, and we've got like something like 340 or so million active users, like monthly active users of Azure AD. And that number of people signing in on at least once a month. It just offers such a huge data set to use for learning, for training AI on what kinds of behaviors are happening that are signals for attacks or for compromised credentials and all sorts of different signals that we see to protect the service and keep the service running, but that we also surface to you as an admin so that you can make decisions based on the data that we have about you and about the other 200,000 organizations that are using Azure AD.
Right. You guys are both technologists. Obviously, you work on certain products. You get a chance to talk to a lot of companies using it, but you're technologists. You sort of love this stuff. Are there any areas, sort of technology areas, that you're now tracking that is coming along? It's kind of emerging as being kind of the next big thing for identity. Either it's solving a new problem, it's kind of new and nascent, or boy, this is going to make a big leap and kind of make something that was really complicated really simple. Any technology space around identity that's people should be on their radar?
One thing that we want to make sure, especially in the developer space, is creating robust solutions that don't expose sensitive information. So in the past, if you were talking to a database, you had to provide some kind of a connection string to your app to be able to connect the database, know where to find that database, the database server, whether it's on the network or the cloud. And that always presented a problem and a challenge for us because, there've been numerous times where I walked into a customer and would look at their solution and they have a file with all the secrets somewhere and API keys and access to sensitive information that developers should not really have purview on, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we are very, very focused on working these days is eliminating the need for secrets or passwords or for applications to be able to communicate with resources on the cloud without really having developers having to expose that information in a clear text somewhere. So managed identities for us is becoming a big thing. We already have lots of services that allow intercommunication securely without developers needing to know how these things work. It's all underpinned by Azure AD. And you can imagine, right? So you can have a website that speaks to a database, maybe some cache server somewhere, or maybe some other file system somewhere else. So I need like 3 different kind of connection strings. So from my perspective, if I were a CTO, I wouldn't like my developers to have access to production databases, to production information. The way to lock that all down is to make managed identities work seamlessly out of the box. So developers can still develop locally against these systems without really having to have the secrets. And when that application moves to production, that migration is seamless again. You don't have to change anything in the code. It just works automatically for you, all underpinned by Azure AD. I think this is something very big for us, eliminating the possibilities for a company because once you become a target as from a hacking group or a team or whatever, then trust me, it's just a matter of time before they get access to your data. So what we want to do is to create these kind of modes, as JP mentioned earlier, where people, once they get access to something, that they can't really move to the next thing in your network because they're automatically shut off. So eliminating that risk with multiple layers of implementation. Yeah, from my perspective, that's exciting.
Yeah, much more confidential type of computing. It's an interesting space. We've seen some of it as things get tied to hardware and hardware keys, but yeah, that's eliminating passwords or sort of hiding passwords is exciting. I was digging in a little bit over the weekend into sort of Microsoft Learn, right? The way that you guys are redoing your docs and sort of integrating them so that your learning experience, your sort of reading experience is tied to a learning experience. If people want to go dig into this, what's an easy starting point for people to start learning more about what Microsoft can do with identity and Azure AD and all the other tools around it?
Obviously, Microsoft Learn is a great place to be. We're putting more and more material out there to allow you to go and learn about identity and find resources. Our docs have a rich set of samples and walkthroughs and getting started with, so easy to get there. But me and JP also are trying to educate developers as much as we can at scale, right? So that's very important. So some of the things that we started playing recently and trying out is building a community or communities and educating these communities via newer tools and services like streaming. So One of the ways to come and learn is to follow us on Twitch at MSID Dev, where we stream every week about building stuff. So we're language agnostic and platform agnostic, and we try to help developers build stuff.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, we've got some folks in my own shop that have been doing a lot with Twitch, and it's just taken off like crazy. So that's very cool. We'll get that linked in the show notes. What I cut you off. You had something else you wanted to talk about?
JP?
Well, no, I think our streaming on Twitch it's been a lot of fun. We've connected with a lot of folks already, and I think for us in the identity group at Microsoft, and our division is sort of the crossroads of everything, right? So you can't transact with Microsoft or use any Microsoft products really without touching one of our identity systems, and it puts us in that unique position of being able to be a little more platform agnostic. So if you're building an app that's running, building a Java app that is going to run on-prem or run in Amazon, we still want to help you secure that app and use Azure AD to give your admins the visibility into it that they need and to make your development experience as quick and easy as possible. So it's been interesting. We've only been streaming code for about a month or two now, but we're seeing a lot of interest from a lot of different developers from all different walks and all different backgrounds, which is encouraging for us because identity is one of those things that when everything goes fine, nobody says a word, and when everything goes wrong, you don't want to be in the news because of that. So we want developers to fall into the pit of success. Right?
There you go. Yeah, no, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it is we comment all the time. It is a very different Microsoft than 2 years ago, 3-4 years ago. And obviously when a lot of us got started and we were just having Windows on our laptop. So it's cool to see you guys, branching out beyond just kind of the Microsoft ecosystem, you getting into a lot of different spaces. Guys, thank you so much for the time today. I know for myself, I don't have a ton of background in identity. I hope the stuff we talked about today educated some other folks as well. Last thing, if anybody wants to kind of reach out to you, what's maybe a good way, Twitter, Twitch, other ways to maybe pick your brain on some of these things?
To Twitch, we're there every Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Eastern on Tuesdays. And every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, we have our community hour. We introduce people from the community and talk about work that they're doing. But Christos and I are both on Twitter. I'm at Azure and Chill. It's much more embarrassing to say it loud, actually. But we're both on Twitter. We're both pretty active on Twitter, and we are happy to take questions there. And we have teams. It's a good opportunity to bring this up too. Is we have teams within our division who are also really interested in helping developers build apps and understand what they should build and how to use our products too. And so we have a link for that too, of a way to engage with our broader identity group as a whole, to get some support or to get some questions answered for everything identity related at Microsoft.
Yeah, very, very cool. Yeah, and we've had some friends for a long time who are at least part of the Azure Dev team. Ashley McNamara and Bridget and a whole bunch of other folks. So good folks over there. Also, always very helpful, guys. Again, thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much for educating us and digging into this stuff. Folks, as always, thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for giving it a rating on iTunes. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.